My name is Garrett Wilson, 35 years old, and I never expected my career as a corporate attorney would be used to fight my own father. When my beloved grandmother Sarah passed away, leaving me her beautiful Cape Cod beach house, I thought my grief was the worst I would face. Then my estranged father showed up after 20 years with a strange man claiming to be a lawyer. I sat quietly as they presented fake documents to steal my inheritance, never suspecting I already knew their game. Before I tell you how I exposed their scheme, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to support stories of justice being served. Growing up, my grandmother Sarah was my rock. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after my father abandoned us, so I spent every summer at Grandma Sarah's beach house in Cape Cod. Those memories are etched into my soul like the tide lines on the shore. Her weathered blue clapboard house sat on 3 acres of prime beachfront property with panoramic views of the Atlantic that took your breath away. The wraparound porch with its white railing was where she taught me to play chess, told me stories about my grandfather, and most importantly, instilled in me a deep respect for honesty and justice. The truth always finds its way to the surface. Garrett, she would say, her eyes crinkling at the corners, like the shells that wash up on our beach after a storm. Those words shaped my future. While other kids my age changed their dream careers weekly, I knew from age 14 exactly what I wanted to be: an attorney. Not just any attorney, but one who stood for what was right. Grandma Sarah beamed with pride when I was accepted to law school, and she was front row at my graduation, clapping louder than anyone when I received my degree. I built a successful career at Harrington, Meyer & Collins, specializing in corporate law with a focus on fraud cases. My colleagues respected my attention to detail and commitment to ethical practice. I had a comfortable condo in Boston, but the beach house remained my sanctuary, the place I retreated to when city life became overwhelming. My father, Richard Wilson, was a complete non-entity in my life from age 12 onward. The day he left, there was no dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye. He simply didn't come home from work one evening. My mother received divorce papers 3 weeks later, and just like that, Richard vanished from our lives. No birthday cards, no child support payments, no Christmas calls, nothing. My mother, resilient as always, never spoke ill of him, but the hurt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. So when Richard suddenly appeared at Grandma Sarah's funeral, I was more than shocked. I was suspicious. He looked older, of course. His once dark hair, now gray, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. But I recognized him instantly. He approached me after the service, offering awkward condolences and a handshake that I accepted out of respect for the solemn occasion. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, as if he had any right to an opinion about her. "Yes, she was," I replied stiffly, fighting the urge to ask where he had been for the past 2 decades. He mentioned staying in town for a few days, suggested we catch up. I nodded noncommittally, too emotionally drained to engage. My focus was on honoring Grandma Sarah, not rehashing ancient history with the man who had chosen to be a stranger. The will reading took place 3 days later, at the office of Thomas Bradford, my grandmother's attorney for over 30 years. A small group gathered: myself, my mother, 2 cousins from Sarah's side, and unexpectedly my father. Thomas, with his silver hair and bow tie, cleared his throat and began reading the formal document. Grandma Sarah had been specific and thoughtful. Small mementos and keepsakes to various family members, charitable donations to the local hospital and library, and then the main assets: a modest savings account divided between my cousins, her car to my mother, and the beach house valued at approximately $4.2 million to me. To my grandson Garrett, who has brought me more joy than I could express, I leave my home on Lighthouse Point with all its contents and surrounding property. May it continue to be a place of happiness and peace for generations to come. I fought back tears as Thomas continued explaining there were no restrictions or conditions on the property. It was mine, free and clear. When I glanced at my father, I caught the briefest flash of something dark crossing his face. Disappointment, anger. Whatever it was, he quickly masked it with a solemn nod. After the reading, he approached me again, this time with a warmer smile. "Your grandmother made a wise choice," he said, patting my shoulder. "You always loved that old house." Something in his tone felt off, but I chalked it up to the awkwardness of our situation. People change, I told myself. Maybe losing his former mother-in-law had made him reflective about family connections he had severed. I didn't trust him, but I was willing to be civil. Little did I know that beneath his newfound interest in family reconciliation lurked a scheme that would test my professional skills and personal boundaries in ways I never imagined. The first red flag appeared about 2 weeks after the funeral. My father called asking how I was doing with all the paperwork and legal stuff. His sudden interest in estate procedures seemed oddly specific for someone who had shown zero interest in my life for 20 years. "Everything's straightforward," I answered cautiously. "Thomas Bradford has handled all the essential filings." "That's great, son," he replied, the word son sounding foreign from his lips. "I was thinking about the beach house. Have you decided what you're going to do with it?" "Keep it, of course," I said without hesitation. "It means everything to me." Of course, he backpedaled quickly. "Just wondering if you might find it a burden with your busy career in the city and all. Beach properties require a lot of maintenance." This pattern continued. He called every few days, always steering the conversation toward the house. Was I planning renovations? Had I considered the property taxes? Did I know about the rising insurance rates for coastal properties? Each call left me more uneasy than the last. Then came the introduction of Walter Preston. My father mentioned him casually during our 6th phone conversation. "I've got this friend Walter. He's an attorney who specializes in property law. Really knows his stuff about beachfront real estate. I mentioned your inheritance, and he said he'd be happy to give you some free advice if you need it." I thanked him politely but declined. I have plenty of legal resources at my disposal, but I appreciate the offer. "Just trying to help my father," said a hint of disappointment in his voice. "Walter's saved clients thousands in taxes with his strategies. But you're the legal expert, right?" The next week, my father invited me to lunch, insisting it was just to reconnect. When I arrived at the restaurant, Walter Preston was sitting beside him in the booth, a tall, thin man with slick-back hair and an ill-fitting suit that screamed discount department store rather than legal professional. "Hope you don't mind," my father said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Walter was in the area, and I thought, why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Throughout lunch, Walter dropped legal terms, like a first-year law student, trying to impress, often using them incorrectly. He referred to property easements when discussing basic deed transfers, and mentioned fiduciary obligations in contexts that made no sense. As a practicing attorney, the errors were glaring, but I nodded politely. "So, Garrett Walter," said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "your father tells me you've inherited quite the valuable piece of real estate. Have you executed a proper title transfer yet?" "Thomas Bradford is handling everything," I replied smoothly. Walter waved his hand dismissively. "Those old-school attorneys often miss opportunities for advantageous filings. I'd be happy to review the paperwork. No charge. Just as a favor. To Richard here." I declined again, more firmly this time. Bradford has been my grandmother's attorney for decades. I trust his expertise implicitly. My father jumped in. "Walter helped a friend save over $50,000 in estate taxes with some special filings. You should at least hear him out." The pressure continued throughout the meal, becoming increasingly uncomfortable. When Walter excused himself to take a phone call, I confronted my father directly. "Dad, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but I have the legal aspects under control." "I just don't want to see you get taken advantage of," he replied, his expression earnest. "Bradford works for the estate, not specifically for you." This statement was not only incorrect, but showed a fundamental misunderstanding of estate law that any real attorney would know. Bradford was executor of the estate and my grandmother's personal attorney. The distinction my father was trying to make was nonsensical. After lunch, my suspicions fully aroused, I did what any good attorney would do. I began investigating. A quick check of the State Bar Association website confirmed my first suspicion. Walter Preston was not a licensed attorney in Massachusetts. Broadening my search to neighboring states yielded nothing. Either Walter was licensed under a different name, or he wasn't an attorney at all. Digging deeper, I found Walter Preston was actually a real estate agent with a checkered history. 3 complaints had been filed against him with the Real Estate Commission, all involving misrepresentation of property values or attempting to facilitate transactions without proper licensing. None had resulted in formal sanctions, but the pattern was clear. Most concerning was a civil case from 4 years ago where Preston had been sued for attempting to execute a property transfer using falsified documents. The case had been settled out of court, the records sealed. I considered confronting my father immediately, but decided on a different approach. If they were planning something, I wanted to know exactly what it was. The attorney in me knew that catching them in the act would provide stronger evidence than making accusations based on suspicions. So I played along. When my father called again, suggesting that Walter could streamline the property transfer process, I expressed mild interest. Maybe he could take a look at some of the paperwork, I conceded, but just to get another perspective. My father was delighted. Too delighted. "Great. How about dinner at my hotel this Friday? Walter will bring some examples of the documents he thinks might help." "Sounds good," I agreed, already planning my counter-strategy. "I'm looking forward to it." The trap was set, but not the one my father and his fake lawyer friend were expecting. Friday evening arrived, and I pulled up to the Harborview Hotel, where my father was staying during his extended visit. He had texted earlier, changing our meeting from the restaurant to his suite, claiming it would be more private for discussing legal matters. Another red flag. When I knocked on the door of room 412, my father greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. "Garrett, come in. Come in. Everyone's already here." Everyone. I stepped into the suite to find not just Walter Preston, but 2 other people I'd never seen before. A heavy-set older man introduced as Jim Walter's paralegal, and a woman in her 50s named Diane. Supposedly a real estate assessment specialist. The suite had been arranged for a business meeting with documents spread across the dining table and a bottle of expensive scotch open on the sideboard. My father immediately poured glasses for everyone, insisting I have a double. To family reconnections, he toasted, watching me intently as I took a small sip. Dinner had been ordered from room service, and the conversation remained superficial as we ate. Walter and my father exchanged knowing glances throughout the meal, while Jim and Diane contributed little beyond agreeing with whatever Walter said. Their roles seemed performative, adding an air of legitimacy to whatever was coming next. After dinner, Walter cleared his throat dramatically. "Richard mentioned you might be feeling overwhelmed with managing your grandmother's estate, especially the beach property." "I wouldn't say overwhelmed," I corrected mildly. "It's a straightforward inheritance." Walter exchanged another glance with my father. "Well, in our research, we've discovered something that might simplify things for everyone." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "These documents recently came to light." Inside was what purported to be a revised will dated just 3 weeks before my grandmother's death. In this version, the beach house was left to my father, with a provision that I would receive $500,000 as compensation. "Your grandmother apparently had second thoughts," my father said softly. "She wanted to make sure I was taken care of in my retirement years." She knew you have your successful career while I'm getting older with little saved. I pretended to study the document, but my legal training immediately spotted numerous problems. The paper quality was different from the official will. The notary stamp was from New Hampshire, not Massachusetts, where my grandmother lived. Most damning, several legal phrases were used incorrectly, similar to Walter's verbal mistakes during our lunch. "This is unexpected," I said, feigning confusion. Why wouldn't she have told me about this change? We spoke weekly. "Sarah was a private woman," my father said quickly. "She probably didn't want to hurt your feelings. She knew how much you loved that house." Walter jumped in. "The important thing is that this is the most recent legal expression of her wishes. The date clearly supersedes the will that was read." I flipped through the pages, slowly noting every flaw. The signature that supposedly belonged to my grandmother was close but not quite right. The witnesses' names were typed but not signed. The document referenced coastal property at Lighthouse Point, but didn't include the correct legal description that would be standard in any legitimate will. "I don't understand," I said, injecting confusion into my voice. "Thomas Bradford never mentioned this." "That's the thing," Walter said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Bradford wasn't involved with this revision. Your grandmother came to me directly, wanting a second opinion. Happens all the time with clients who want to make changes their longtime attorneys might question." This claim was absurd on multiple levels. My grandmother, a stickler for proper procedure, would never have gone to an unknown attorney. She trusted Thomas Bradford implicitly, and even if she had sought another opinion, she would have used a properly licensed attorney, not a fraudulent one. "I'll need time to process this," I said, closing the folder. "And I should probably consult with Bradford." "That's not necessary," Walter said quickly. "In fact, it could complicate things. We have all the paperwork ready for the property transfer. If we file tomorrow, we can avoid the next quarter's property tax assessment completely." My father slid another document toward me. "This is a simple quitclaim deed. You sign here acknowledging the updated will and transferring any interest in the property to me. In return, I'll arrange for the $500,000 to be transferred to your account next week." "That's very efficient," I commented, noting the document wasn't even properly drawn up. It referenced statutes that didn't exist and used commercial property language for a residential transfer. "We're just trying to make this easy for everyone," my father said, producing a pen. "No need for expensive legal consultations or court appearances." The pressure tactics intensified with Walter explaining how time-sensitive the filing was, and my father reminiscing about how my grandmother had always wanted to make things right with him. "I really need some time to think about this," I insisted, standing up. "It's a lot to take in. I need to review these documents carefully." "There's nothing to review," Walter said, his friendly demeanor slipping slightly. "It's all standard legal procedure. Sign now, and you'll have the money by next Friday." "Just think about it overnight," I conceded, picking up the folder. "I'd like to take these with me to read more carefully." Walter looked alarmed. "We should really keep the originals secure. I can make copies for you." "These aren't originals," I pointed out, seeing no embossed notary seal or original signatures. "They're already copies." Reluctantly, they let me leave with the documents, my father walking me to the elevator with assurances that this was what Sarah wanted and how it would bring our family back together. As soon as I reached my car, I carefully placed the folder in my briefcase. The evidence of their scheme was now literally in my hands, and I was ready to move to the next phase of my counterplan. The moment I got home, I spread the fraudulent documents across my dining room table and began photographing everything from multiple angles, ensuring I captured all the flaws. Then I called Alicia Ramirez, my colleague at the firm, and our best litigator. "Alicia, I need your eyes on something urgent," I said when she answered. "Can you meet me for breakfast tomorrow?" "This sounds serious," she replied. 7:30 at Rosie's Diner. Perfect. And Alicia, bring your fraud detection radar. Sleep was impossible that night. The betrayal cut deep. I'd been cautiously open to reconnecting with my father, giving him the benefit of the doubt, despite 20 years of absence. Now I understood his sudden reappearance had nothing to do with family and everything to do with greed. At breakfast, Alicia studied the documents with growing disbelief. "This is amateur hour," she muttered, pointing to inconsistencies I had already noted, and several more I had missed. "The notary stamp is particularly damning." I ran the number through our database. "It belongs to a notary whose license expired 4 years ago. So not just fraudulent, but lazy fraud," I said, sipping my coffee. "Exactly. And this signature? I assume you have samples of your grandmother's actual signature for comparison." I pulled out the birthday card Grandma Sarah had sent me 2 months before her death. The difference was obvious, even to an untrained eye. "What's your plan?" Alicia asked, her expression serious. "This is criminal activity, Garrett. Attempted fraud forgery, impersonating a legal professional." I know I sighed. "And it gets more complicated because my father is involved. Part of me wants to just confront them, scare them off. But another part wants to see them face consequences she finished for me. That's not vindictive, Garrett. It's justice. What they're attempting is serious." She was right, of course. If they had tried this scheme with someone more vulnerable or less legally knowledgeable, they might have succeeded. How many others had they already defrauded? "I need more information before I decide," I told her, especially about my father's motivation. That afternoon, I contacted Martin Reeves, a private investigator our firm often worked with on corporate cases. "I need a complete background check on Richard Wilson and Walter Preston," I explained. "Financial history, current debts, criminal record, everything you can find. And I need it yesterday. For you, Garrett, consider it done. I'll have preliminary findings by tonight." Next, I called Thomas Bradford, explaining the situation and emailing him scans of the fraudulent documents. "This is outrageous," the elderly attorney sputtered. "Your grandmother would never have done this. And I can prove it." Sarah was in my office discussing minor updates to her existing will just 2 days before the date on this forgery. She never mentioned any intention to change her primary bequest to you. "Can you document that meeting?" I asked. "Of course. My assistant keeps meticulous records of all client meetings. I'll send you the calendar entry and my notes immediately." With Bradford's help, I gathered additional documentation proving the legitimate will's validity, witnesses' contact information, original signing documentation, and the continuity of my grandmother's intentions regarding the beach house going back years. Martin's investigation yielded results faster than expected. He called that evening. "Your father's in serious financial trouble," he reported. "Gambling debts approaching $300,000 to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City. Multiple maxed-out credit cards. 2 failed businesses in the past 5 years. He's been living in a month-to-month rental in New Jersey, and based on his bank records, he's nearly broke." And Walter Preston, small-time con artist, no legal training whatsoever, has been involved in at least 4 property scams, similar to what you're describing. Was arrested twice, but charges were dropped when victims declined to testify. Works primarily with desperate people who need quick cash. Your father fits his usual client profile perfectly. The picture was becoming clearer. My father, desperate for money, had connected with Preston to target what they saw as an easy mark. A long-estranged son who might be manipulated through family obligation or guilt. I spent the next day setting my trap. First, I purchased small, high-quality recording devices and placed them strategically around my apartment. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, but I would inform them they were being recorded once they arrived, making it legal. Next, I contacted Detective Sandra Martinez at the Boston Police Department's Fraud Division. Sandra and I had worked together on cases before, and she understood the sensitivity of the situation. "I'll have officers ready to respond," she promised. "Just text me when you need them there." I called my father that evening. "I've been thinking about those documents," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I have some questions. Could you and Walter come to my apartment tomorrow evening to discuss the next steps?" "That's great news, son," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "What time works for you?" 7 o'clock. "And Dad, I think I'm ready to move forward with this. Grandma Sarah would want us to be a family again." "That's exactly right," he agreed eagerly. "She would be so happy." As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness that our relationship had come to this. Anger at his willingness to exploit family connections for financial gain. But also a firm resolve to see justice done not just for myself, but for my grandmother's memory and wishes. The final piece fell into place when Alicia arranged for Mark Jenkins, a notary and security professional from our firm, to be present as an independent witness. He would arrive shortly after my father and Walter, posing as my financial advisor who happened to be stopping by. That night, I sat on the deck of the beach house, watching the waves crash against the shore. This place had been my sanctuary, filled with beautiful memories of the woman who had been more parent to me than my own father ever was. I would not let her final gift be tainted by fraud and deception. "I'll protect your legacy, Grandma," I whispered to the ocean breeze. "I promise." The next evening, I meticulously prepared my apartment for what was to come. Recording devices were tested and activated. Important documents were arranged in a specific order inside my desk drawer. A bottle of expensive bourbon sat on the coffee table with 3 glasses, part of the performance I was about to give. At 6:58, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, checked that the recording app on my phone was running, and opened the door. "Welcome," I greeted, shaking hands with both men. "Thanks for coming." My father looked around my apartment appreciatively. "Nice place, son. Very professional." Walter had brought a sleek leather portfolio, clearly intending to appear more legitimate than during our previous meeting. "I've brought the final versions of all the paperwork," he announced, patting the portfolio. "Everything's ready for signatures." "Great," I replied, gesturing toward the living room. "Please make yourselves comfortable, Bourbon." As I poured drinks, I casually mentioned, "Just so you both know, I record all my professional meetings. Force of habit from the firm. I hope that's not a problem." Walter froze momentarily, but quickly recovered. "No problem at all. Everything here is completely above board." "Absolutely," my father agreed, though I noticed him glance nervously at Walter. We settled into the living room, and Walter immediately opened his portfolio, pulling out documents nearly identical to the ones they had shown me previously. "So, as we discussed, this is the amended will that your grandmother executed shortly before her passing." Walter began sliding the document across the coffee table. "And this is the quitclaim deed, transferring the property to your father in accordance with those wishes." I picked up the paperwork, pretending to review it carefully. "The beach house means a great deal to me," I said slowly. "I spent every summer there with Grandma Sarah." "And you'll still have those memories," my father interjected quickly. "Plus the financial compensation. Think of what you could do with $500,000 down payment on a place of your own, right here in Boston." "I'm curious about something," I said, setting down the documents. "The notary stamp on this will. It's from New Hampshire." Walter nodded confidently. "Yes, your grandmother happened to be visiting friends in Portsmouth when she decided to make these changes. Perfectly legal to use a New Hampshire notary." "Interesting," I replied. because according to her medical records, she was in Massachusetts General Hospital for tests that entire week, receiving treatment for the heart condition that eventually took her life. A flicker of alarm crossed Walter's face. Perhaps I'm mistaken about the exact date. The thing is, I continued calmly, my grandmother was extremely methodical about legal matters. She would never have gone to an unfamiliar attorney for something this important. She trusted Thomas Bradford implicitly. People change their minds, my father said dismissively, especially at her age. Let's talk about the property description, I said, pointing to a paragraph in the fake will. It references coastal property at Lighthouse Point, but doesn't include the correct legal description, parcel number, or property boundaries. Any legitimate will would include those details. Walter shifted uncomfortably. Those are just technical formalities. The intent is clear. And then there's the matter of the witnesses. I continued, warming to my task. 2 names are typed here, but there are no actual signatures. That invalidates the entire document under Massachusetts law. We have the original with signatures at my office, Walter claimed. These are just copies. Your office, I asked innocently. Where is that located exactly? Downtown, he said vaguely. State Street. What's the address? I'd like to see the originals. Walter cleared his throat. That won't be necessary. I can bring them next time. My father, sensing the conversation going off track, jumped in. Look, Garrett, the important thing here is honoring your grandmother's final wishes and bringing our family back together. All this legal nitpicking doesn't change her intentions. I leaned forward. Let's be clear about intentions. My grandmother intended for me to have the beach house. She told me so repeatedly in the years before her death. She even mentioned it in her birthday card to me 2 months before she passed away. Walter waved his hand dismissively. People say lots of things. What matters is what they put in legal documents. I couldn't agree more. I replied, opening my desk drawer. Which is why I find it concerning that this supposed legal document contains multiple errors that any real attorney would never make. My father's expression hardened. What are you implying, Garrett? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. This document is a forgery. Walter Preston is not an attorney. And this entire scheme is fraudulent. Walter stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. You clearly aren't ready to accept the truth. Please sit down, Mr. Preston, I said firmly. Or should I say, Walter Pritchett, given that's the name on your prior arrest record, for similar scams in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The color drained from Walter's face. My father looked between us in confusion. What are you talking about? He demanded. I'm a corporate attorney specializing in fraud cases, I said, finally revealing my hand. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate suspicious documents related to a multi-million-dollar property? Did you think I wouldn't run a background check on a supposed lawyer I'd never heard of? I pulled out a folder and spread its contents on the coffee table. Walter Preston has never been licensed to practice law in any state. He's a real estate agent with a suspended license and multiple complaints for fraudulent activities. The notary stamp on this will belong to someone whose license expired 4 years ago, and the signature purporting to be my grandmother's doesn't match her actual signature on any legitimate document. The doorbell rang at that moment, right on cue. That must be Mark, I said, standing up. My financial advisor. He's also a licensed notary in case we decided to proceed tonight. I opened the door to Mark, who entered with a professional nod. Perfect timing, I told him. We were just discussing some interesting documents. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. By forging my grandmother's will, I asked incredulously. By attempting to steal a $4.2 million property that she explicitly left to me. That's not help, Dad. That's criminal fraud. Walter grabbed his portfolio, stuffing documents inside haphazardly. I don't have to listen to these accusations. I'm leaving. Before you go, I said, picking up my phone, you should know that Detective Sandra Martinez of the Boston Police Department is waiting for my text. She's very interested in your operation, especially given your previous activities. As if on cue, another knock at the door. Mark opened it to reveal Detective Martinez and two uniformed officers. Perfect timing, Detective, I said. We were just discussing some questionable legal documents. My father's face went from angry to panicked in an instant. Garrett, don't do this. We can work something out. Walter made a sudden move toward the door, but one of the officers stepped into his path. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right here. Officers, I said formally, I'd like to report an attempted fraud. These men presented forged documents, attempting to steal property valued at over $4 million. I have evidence of the forgery witness testimony from the actual attorney who handled my grandmother's estate and recordings of this entire meeting where they continued to present these fraudulent documents, despite questions about their legitimacy. Detective Martinez nodded. We'll need statements from everyone and all evidence preserved. Walter immediately crumbled. It was his idea, he blurted, pointing at my father. He came to me desperate for money. Said his son was naive and would probably sign anything if he thought it would reconnect them. I just provided the templates. My father's betrayal was complete. Not only had he attempted to steal my inheritance, but he had specifically targeted what he perceived as my emotional vulnerability, my desire to reconcile with him. That's not true, my father protested weakly. He told me this was all legal, a simple amendment that might have been overlooked. Save it for your statement, Downtown Detective Martinez said firmly. Both of you will need to come with us now. As the officers led them toward the door, my father turned to me one last time. Son, please. You can't do this to your own father. I looked him directly in the eyes. You stopped being my father 20 years ago when you walked out. Today you proved that was the right decision. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto my couch, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me exhausted but resolute. Mark placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Garrett. Not just for yourself, but for anyone else they might have targeted next. I nodded silently, knowing he was right, but still feeling the weight of what had just transpired. Family relationships, even broken ones, leave deep imprints. But so does justice. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings and paperwork. The morning after the arrest, I provided Detective Martinez with all my evidence. The forged documents, my grandmother's actual will, the recording of our meeting, and the background information on both Walter and my father. Walter broke completely during his initial interrogation, eager to minimize his own culpability. According to the detective, he provided detailed information about how my father had sought him out through a mutual acquaintance after learning about my inheritance. Your father apparently has significant gambling debts, Martinez explained during our follow-up meeting. According to Preston, he was being pressured by some dangerous people for repayment. The beach house was his solution. The evidence against both men was overwhelming. Walter was charged with multiple felonies, forgery, fraud, practicing law without a license, and conspiracy to commit property theft. My father faced slightly less severe but still serious charges of conspiracy and attempted fraud. Thomas Bradford was outraged when I showed him the forged will. In 47 years of practice, I've never seen such a blatant attempt to circumvent a client's wishes, he fumed. Sarah was explicit about leaving you that house. She would be appalled by this scheme. Bradford offered to represent me through the criminal proceedings, but I assured him that wouldn't be necessary. The district attorney has everything they need. I'll be focusing on moving forward. The hardest part came when I had to decide whether to press charges against my own father. Alicia and I discussed it over lunch in the firm's conference room. You have every right to pursue this to the fullest extent. she said, picking at her salad. What he attempted was not just illegal, but a profound betrayal. I know I sighed. But he's still my father biologically, at least. And according to the detective, he's in serious trouble with some loan sharks. Prison might actually be safer for him right now. That's his problem, not yours, Alicia pointed out. He made his choices. She was right, of course. Yet something in me still hesitated. Not out of affection, but perhaps from the last remnants of the child who had once looked up to him before he'd walked away. Ultimately, I decided not to actively advocate for maximum charges, but wouldn't intervene to reduce them either. Justice would take its course without my thumb on the scale either way. 2 days later, my father requested to see me. Against Alicia's advice, I agreed to meet him in the visitation room at the detention center. He looked smaller. Somehow, his confident facade crumbled his eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Thank you for coming," he said, as we sat across from each other at the metal table. "I'm not here for reconciliation," I said firmly. "I just want to understand why." He ran his hands through his gray hair. "I'm not going to make excuses. I needed money badly. When I heard about your grandmother leaving you the beach house, I saw an opportunity. It was wrong. Despicable, really. That doesn't explain the past 20 years," I pointed out. "You abandoned us long before you needed money from me." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I was a coward. Your mother and you deserved better. I told myself you were better off without me. But that was just justification for my selfishness." For a moment I saw genuine remorse in his expression, but it wasn't enough to erase 2 decades of absence or the recent betrayal. "I have gambling debts," he continued. "Serious ones. People are looking for me. People who don't resolve debts through legal channels. I was desperate. So desperate you'd steal from your own son. I convinced myself you wouldn't really be hurt. That you had your career, your city life. That the house was just an extra asset to you. It was never about the money," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "That house is my connection to the one person who was always there for me. The memories it holds can't be replaced or valued in dollars." He nodded slowly. "I see that now. Too late, obviously." We sat in silence for a moment before I stood up. "I can't forgive this, not now, maybe not ever. But I won't actively push for maximum charges either. Whatever the court decides, that's on you." "That's more than I deserve," he acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I am sorry, Garrett. Truly." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "The house. Take care of it." Sarah loved that place. She'd want it preserved. It was perhaps the only genuine thing he'd said since reappearing in my life. Back at work, news of the case had spread despite my attempts at discretion. The firm's partners were supportive, with several offering assistance with any lingering legal issues. My reputation actually seemed enhanced by how I'd handled the situation, demonstrating both legal acumen and ethical backbone. "The Jenkins case could use your expertise," Harold Harrington, the founding partner, mentioned casually during our monthly review, Corporate Fraud with Family Business Complications. "Right up your alley, given recent events." It was his way of saying my personal ordeal had only confirmed my professional value. Walter Preston's case moved quickly. With his prior record and the overwhelming evidence, his attorney advised a plea deal. He received 4 years in state prison plus probation and was permanently barred from any real estate or legal adjacent work. My father's case took longer to resolve. Without Walter's extensive criminal history and with a better attorney, he eventually pleaded to lesser charges. He received 18 months with possibility of parole after 10+ restitution payments and community service. Throughout this period, I received several interview requests from local news outlets interested in the story of an attorney who foiled a plot against his own inheritance. I declined them all, preferring to put the entire situation behind me rather than publicize it further. The beach house remained my sanctuary, though now with additional security measures installed. The betrayal had left me more cautious, more aware of how greed can corrupt even family bonds. But I refused to let it change the essential character of the place my grandmother had loved so dearly. 6 months after the arrests, I took an extended leave from the firm. 3 weeks to focus entirely on the beach house and what I wanted its future to be. The first thing I did was hire contractors to complete the renovations my grandmother had always talked about, but never gotten around to updating the kitchen, reinforcing the deck that faced the ocean, repainting the exterior that perpetually battled salt air and coastal storms. Each change was carefully considered to preserve the character she had loved while ensuring the house would stand strong for decades to come. I replaced the worn furniture but kept her antique chess set and rocking chair, perfect symbols of what should be preserved and what could be renewed. As the work progressed, I found myself thinking more about my grandmother's legacy beyond just the physical property. Sarah Wilson had been a pillar of her community, volunteering at the local library, organizing beach cleanups, and quietly helping neighbors in need. The house had been just one manifestation of her generous spirit. One evening, sitting on the newly reinforced deck watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in gold and crimson, inspiration struck. I called Alicia the next morning. "I want to establish a foundation," I told her. The Sarah Wilson Legal Aid Foundation, providing representation to victims of fraud and predatory schemes, especially the elderly. "That's perfect, Garrett," she replied enthusiastically. "The firm would probably support it with pro bono hours." I know I would. Over the next few weeks, the idea took shape. I would seed the foundation with personal funds, and partners at the firm agreed to contribute both money and professional time. By focusing specifically on fraud targeting vulnerable populations, we could honor my grandmother's commitment to justice while addressing a real need in the community. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father remained complicated. After serving 4 months of his sentence, he wrote me a letter that seemed genuinely remorseful, acknowledging the depth of his betrayal without asking for forgiveness. He mentioned entering a gambling addiction program in prison and enclosed a certificate of completion. I didn't respond immediately, unsure whether any relationship could or should be salvaged from such broken trust. Eventually, I wrote back with a simple message. I appreciated his efforts to address his addiction and wished him well in that journey. But reconciliation would require time and demonstrated change, not just words. When he was released on parole after 10 months, he contacted me again, asking not for money or assistance, but offering to make amends in whatever way I thought appropriate. After consideration, I suggested he volunteer with a coastal conservation group that maintained the beaches near my grandmother's house. It seemed fitting that he contribute to preserving something he had tried to take away. Somewhat to my surprise, he agreed. According to the program coordinator, he showed up reliably every week, working diligently without complaint. It was a small step, perhaps too small to ever rebuild what had been broken, but it was something. The beach house itself became more than just my personal retreat. I began hosting gatherings for friends, colleagues, and eventually clients of the foundation. The place that held such important memories for me became a space where new connections formed and healing began for others who had experienced betrayal similar to mine. Thomas Bradford, now semi-retired, visited occasionally, sharing stories about my grandmother I had never heard. Sarah would be proud, he told me during one such visit, not just of how you protected her wishes, but of how you've built something positive from such a negative experience. My professional focus shifted somewhat as well. I began taking on more fraud cases, particularly those involving family businesses or inheritance disputes. My personal experience gave me unique insight into both the legal and emotional dimensions of such cases. 1 year after the confrontation with my father and Walter, I received an unexpected email from Detective Martinez. Walter Preston was being considered for early release based on good behavior, and she wanted to know if I had any objection. I thought carefully before responding. "Justice has been served," I wrote back. I have no desire to extend his punishment beyond what the court deemed appropriate. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that holding on to anger would only limit my own future. My grandmother had taught me that justice and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. As for the beach house, it remained my anchor and sanctuary. I installed a small plaque on the porch, visible only to those who knew to look for it: Sarah's legacy. Truth always rises to the surface like shells after a storm. On quiet evenings, sitting in her rocking chair watching the waves, I sometimes felt her presence approving of how I'd protected not just the property but the principles she had instilled in me, standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Recognizing that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in integrity and relationships built on trust. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also clarified what mattered most. My father had seen only the monetary value of the beach house. He had never understood that its true worth lay in the memories it held, the values it represented, and the future it could still nurture. As the foundation grew and helped more people recover from fraud and betrayal, I often shared the most important lesson I had learned. Through my own experience, trust should be given carefully, but when betrayed, it shouldn't harden your brent heart against the possibility of genuine connections. Caution and openness could coexist. My grandmother taught me that we should judge people by their actions, not their words, I would tell foundation clients. But she also believed in the possibility of growth and change. The key is requiring evidence of that change before extending trust again. The beach house stands today as a testament to both principles: a place built on love and preserved through vigilance, a legacy protected not just for my benefit, but for all it represents about doing what's right, even when it's difficult. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have pressed charges against a family member who betrayed you or tried to find another way forward? Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If this story of justice and healing resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right, even in the most difficult circumstances. And remember, the strongest foundations are built not just on legal documents, but on truth, integrity, and the courage to protect what matters most. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength and clarity if you ever face your own moment of difficult decision.